Welcome back to the deep dive. And before we even really get started today,
Yeah, do us a huge favor.
exactly, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really is the best way to support these in-depth explorations we do for you.
And you are definitely not going to want to miss a single second of what we have lined up.
Right, because today's subject is, I mean, it's massive in every sense of the word.
Oh, absolutely. The support means everything, especially when we're tackling material that is this dense.
Yeah, dense, complex, and frankly, completely paradigm shifting. We're reviewing an incredibly provocative, ultra long, and really incisive new ebook.
It's called The Great White Father Dairy's Patriarchal Protection of Men.
Written by Conrad Riker. And look, we've custom tailored this specific deep dive explicitly for you.
Right, for the men in the manosphere, the men's rights activist community, and those of you who strongly identify as red-pilled.
The whole goal today is to look at the history of our foundational institutions through Riker's lens, specifically examining how they operated before they were, as he argues, completely captured by feminists and Marxists.
We should tell them right up front.
Oh, yeah. If you want to seize the knowledge contained in this manifesto right now, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook.
Definitely do that. And make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker over at Substack.
But before we dive into the actual text, we need to set some ground rules for this one.
Yes, I need to make our position on this show completely clear to you, the listener. We are unpacking a highly politically charged text today that discusses the capture of our institutions by feminists and Marxists.
Right.
We, as your guides, are not taking sides or endorsing these viewpoints. Our mission is simply to impartially report on the fascinating ideas contained in the source material, so you can understand the author's arguments for yourself.
We're just looking at the mechanics of what he's saying.
Exactly. We are analyzing his arguments, not validating them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Riker's core thesis is it's nothing short of a total paradigm shift regarding how we view the food on our plates.
It really is. He's presenting this argument that modern civilization is actively crumbling.
And not because of abstract political shifts.
Right. But because men have been deliberately, systematically separated from the biological fuel that literally built empires.
And what is that exact fuel, according to Riker?
Full-fat, raw dairy.
It sounds wild at first, but he makes this intense case that the massive societal push toward plant-based diets, veganism, low-fat alternatives,
He says it isn't actually about cardiovascular health.
or saving the environment.
No. Instead, he views it as a coordinated, intentional effort to chemically castrate the modern male.
Which is an incredibly heavy claim to start with.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is how Riker grounds this entire argument. He doesn't even start with modern nutrition science.
He just completely bypasses it.
He bypasses the entire dietary establishment and roots his premise in classical philosophy. He goes straight back to ancient Greece.
Specifically to Aristotle's concept of telos.
Right. And for those who might not be familiar with Aristotelian philosophy, telos essentially means the ultimate purpose.
The inherent goal.
Yeah, the final intended state of a thing.
Yeah.
Like an acorn's telos is to become an oak tree.
Right.
Riker argues that to truly understand food, you have to look at the telos of dairy versus the telos of plant matter.
Because milk isn't just some beverage you casually pour over your morning cereal.
Not at all. According to his framework, its biological telos is rapid, explosive, vertical biological development.
Which makes sense when you think about what it actually is in nature.
Exactly. Riker points out that mammal milk is quite literally designed by nature to take a scrawny 80-pound calf and transform it into a 1,500-pound muscle-dense beast of burden.
Or warrior.
Yes, that is its biological directive it wants to build. And Riker draws this incredibly sharp, almost poetic contrast between the active, transformative potential of animal dairy and the passive, static nature of plant matter.
He describes plant matter as just kind of existing in a state of photosynthesizing, waiting, and initially decaying.
So he's setting up this massive dichotomy. Consuming dairy is consuming a substance with momentum.
Teleological momentum.
Teleological momentum, exactly. He argues that milk carries an inherent biological contract to strengthen the consumer. Plants, on the other hand, do not want to be eaten.
They can't run away.
Right, so they possess biological defense mechanisms.
Things like inflammatory lectins and phytates.
Exactly. Toxins designed to harm the creature consuming them. So in his view, choosing plants over dairy is literally choosing static decay and inflammation over explosive growth and vitality.
And he takes this a massive step further by completely reframing human evolution. Let's talk about lactase persistence.
Yeah, the ability to digest milk as an adult.
Because modern science usually frames that ability as a random genetic mutation that just kind of happened to stick around in certain populations.
Riker completely rejects that phrase. He rejects random mutation, and he hates the modern idea of dietary privilege.
What does he call it instead?
He calls lactase persistence a dominant evolutionary upgrade.
An upgrade.
Yes. He looks at history through a strictly genetic and metabolic lens. He points specifically to the Yamnaya people.
The Proto-Indo-European pastoralists.
Right, the ones who lived on the Eurasian steppe around 3000 BC. Now, the steppe is an incredibly harsh environment.
Freezing winters, sparse vegetation.
Agriculture is basically impossible. The hunter-gatherer lifestyle there is just a constant, precarious dance with starvation.
But the Yamnaya had this upgrade.
They did. They could process the milk of their herds into adulthood. And because they could digest the milk of their herds, they entirely bypassed the starvation cycle of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle.
They generated a massive caloric surplus.
A surplus of high-density energy, fat and protein from milk. Riker argues that it was this specific surplus that fueled the rise of the polis, the Senate, and Western high culture.
He says they didn't just spread their Proto-Indo-European language across the continent.
He claims they spread the genetics of the master builder.
And he doesn't mince words about the alternative either. How does he frame populations or individuals who lack this lactase persistence?
Oh, he is quite ruthless in his categorization. He frames those who cannot digest milk as evolutionary vestiges.
Wow.
Yeah. He essentially posits that lactase persistence is the biology of the victor, and to deny that is to deny the mechanics of human history.
He leans heavily on Gregor Mendel for that, right?
He does. He uses Mendel's foundational principles of genetics to argue that this dominant genetic trait naturally rules the phenotype of any successful, expansive civilization.
Now, to back up this claim that heavy dairy consumption creates a superior physical specimen, he doesn't just rely on ancient European history.
No, he brings in modern anthropology as well.
He introduces what he calls the Maasai exception. He cites the mid-20th century fieldwork of Dr. George Schaller and Dr. George Fiefman.
This is the linchpin of his nutritional argument.
Can you break down why this specific example is so crucial to his overarching thesis?
Absolutely. The Maasai people, specifically the Moran warrior class in East Africa, provide what Riker considers the ultimate refutation of modern dietary guidelines.
Specifically what he calls the fraudulent lipid hypothesis.
Right.
And just so we're all on the same page, the lipid hypothesis is the standard medical consensus that consuming high amounts of saturated fat and dietary cholesterol leads to heart disease.
Correct. For decades, the medical establishment has warned that animal fats clog arteries. But then you look at Dr. Mann's study of the Maasai Morans in the 1960s.
Their diet is extreme.
It consists of roughly 66% whole, raw milk, supplemented with high-fat meat and bovine blood.
They consume virtually no vegetables or grains at all.
None. By the logic of the lipid hypothesis and modern dietary guidelines, these men should have been dropping dead of massive myocardial infarctions in their mid-20s.
Their cholesterol intake was staggering.
Staggering. But the data showed the exact opposite.
Entirely the opposite.
Dr. Mann performed extensive EKG tests and autopsies, and the researchers found virtually zero evidence of coronary heart disease among the Maasai.
Zero.
Furthermore, and this is the data point Riker really fixates on, they possessed testosterone levels and physical endurance markers significantly higher than the average Western male.
So Riker uses them as living, breathing monuments to the potency of saturated fat.
Yes. He directly compares the towering, hypermasculine Maasai warrior fueled by a gallon of raw milk a day to his archetype of the modern vegan leftist.
He paints this very visceral picture, doesn't he?
He does. He describes the modern vegan huddled in a corner, consuming those inflammatory lectins and phytates we mentioned earlier, just suffering from low energy and hormonal imbalance. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, Rucker isn't content to leave this as merely a nutritional debate.
No, he elevates it.
He elevates this dietary choice to a theological and metaphysical level. He borrows heavily from the medieval philosophy of Thomas Aquinas.
Wait, how does he get from East African cattle herders to medieval Christian theology?
Through Aquinas' concept of the great chain of being.
Okay, break that down for us.
Aquinas articulated a strict, divinely ordained hierarchy to the universe. In this hierarchy, inanimate objects exist for plants, plants exist for animals, animals exist for man, and man exists for God.
Everything has its proper place.
And its proper function in service to the tier above it.
And Riker applies this to the modern animal rights movement.
He does. Riker argues that vegans and animal rights activists are attempting what he calls a satanic inversion of this natural divine order.
A satanic inversion. That is incredibly strong language.
Very strong.
What exactly is being inverted?
The hierarchy itself. By claiming that animal life is sacred or that consuming animals is murder, Riker says vegans are artificially elevating animal life to the level of human flourishing.
Or even placing it above human needs.
Exactly. He argues they are placing the soul of the cow on the exact same metaphysical plane as the reasoning, empire-building mind of man.
So, in Riker's view, a patriarchal figure isn't being cruel when he harvests milk or meat. He is actually fulfilling a sacred duty.
Yes, he completely redefines patriarchal stewardship. It is not about sadism. It is a sacred biological contract.
The patriarch acts as the protector.
He shields the herd from predators, disease, the chaos of the wild. And in exchange for providing that ultimate security, the patriarch has the divine and natural right to extract the herd's vitality.
It's milk and it's meat.
Right, to fuel his own strength, cognition, and capacity to govern.
To deny this hierarchy, to refuse the milk and meat out of misplaced empathy.
Riker views it as a total rejection of the fundamental structure of reality itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Riker doesn't just speak in philosophical abstracts. He pinpoints an exact historical moment, a specific year, when he claims this natural order was intentionally subverted by the state apparatus in America.
The year 1977.
Right. The McGovern Report.
The U.S. Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, led by Senator George McGovern.
Riker claims this committee's findings marked the exact moment that what he calls gynocentric maternalism invaded state policy.
Yes. Instead of promoting the robust, high-fat, high-protein fuel of the patriarchy, the government shifted dietary guidelines massively toward carbohydrates and grains.
He categorizes this as the fat fallacy moment.
In Riker's interpretation of history, this was the pivot. The state prioritized a feminine-coded ethic of safety, avoiding fat, lowering cholesterol, playing it safe over the masculine ethic of strength, vitality, and acceptable biological risk.
And he claims this bureaucratic shift culminated in something we are all incredibly familiar with, the 1992 USDA food pyramid.
But he doesn't view the food pyramid as just flawed nutritional science.
No, he views it as a deliberate bureaucratic weapon.
Think about what the base of that food pyramid actually recommended in the 90s.
It told Americans to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta every single day.
Precisely. And what happens to human biochemistry when you consume that volume of processed carbohydrates?
You have massive insulin spikes.
Followed by plummeting blood sugar, which inevitably leads to chronic lethargy, brain fog, and weight gain.
Riker's argument is that a population physically swollen and exhausted from processing cheap carbohydrates is a population entirely unable to revolt against the state.
He has this striking quote where he says, "The food pyramid transformed the lions of the West into grain-fed sheep grazing in the feedlot of democracy."
He is essentially claiming that dietary guidelines are a literal form of population control.
Which brings us directly to the endocrinological core of his conspiracy theory.
The concept of phytoestrogens and what he explicitly terms chemical castration.
Yes.
This is a huge talking point in the manosphere, but Riker really tries to nail down the science. Can you explain the mechanics of what he's claiming here? He cites specific 2016 research by an author named Messina.
Regarding soy isoflavones, yes, I can break that down. To understand his argument, we need a quick primer on how hormones work. Think of your body's hormone receptors like locks, and the hormones themselves like keys. Testosterone is the key that unlocks male physical traits, aggression, and drive. Estrogen is the primary female sex hormone.
Locks and keys. Got it.
Riker points out that certain plant compounds, specifically a soy isoflavone called genistein, are classified as phytoestrogens. Phyto meaning plant.
Right.
He argues that genistein structurally mimics 17-beta-estradiol, which is the most potent form of mammalian estrogen. Because it looks so similar on a molecular level, it can fit into the estrogen receptors in a human male's body.
So the plant key fits the human lock.
According to Riker, yes.
Yeah.
And he constructs a formal logical argument out of this, which he dramatically calls the syllogism of emasculation.
Break down that syllogism for us.
Premise 1. Endogenous testosterone is the primary biological driver of masculine assertion, territorial defense, and empire building. Premise 2. The xenoestrogens found in soy and other plant-based dietary staples actively disrupt male androgen receptors and suppress the natural production of testosterone.
So the conclusion is
Conclusion. Therefore, the institutional promotion of a soy-based, plant-heavy diet is literally dismantling the patriarchal impulse at a molecular level.
wow.
By pushing men away from dairy and meat and toward plant mimics, he says the state is performing a prefrontal lobotomy of the male endocrine system.
He goes so far as to claim that the internet slang term soy boy isn't just a derogatory insult.
He says it should be classified as a legitimate medical diagnosis of hormonal suppression.
And he links this suppressed biological state directly to the psychological and political behavior of modern leftists.
He introduces this concept of the soy boy algorithm.
Right. He views these individuals, those fully bought into the plant-based, state-approved diet, not as reasoning autonomous agents, but as NPC zombies.
Non-player characters in a video game who only have pre-programmed responses.
He says they're running a closed-loop mental script. The input is dairy or meat. The pre-programmed output is automatically cruelty, climate change, bad.
He argues they are entirely ideologically possessed. Because their brains are starved of saturated fats and their hormones are suppressed by phytoestrogens, they literally lack the cognitive overhead to process complex variables.
Variables of human biochemistry or historical precedent.
He gives a very specific example of this glitching.
He does. He says that when you present one of these individuals with the historical fact that Genghis Khan conquered the known world fueled almost entirely by mare's milk and raw meat, their programming glitches.
They physically cannot integrate that data point because they operate on a hive mind of what he calls narcissistic irresponsibility.
They cannot fathom a reality where dominance and violence are fueled by the very thing they consider morally repulsive.
And Riker doesn't just blame the individuals. He argues this biological programming is forced onto citizens from childhood by the state apparatus.
He launches an absolutely scathing, sustained critique of the Healthy, Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010.
Yes.
This was the major public health initiative championed by former First Lady Michelle Obama, correct?
It was. The initiative overhauled school cafeteria menus across the country. And one of the most significant changes was the removal of whole, full-fat milk.
Replacing it with flavored skim milk or low-fat options to reduce childhood caloric intake.
Riker attacks this with everything he has. He refers to skim milk as nutrient-poor white water.
But his argument goes way beyond just taste or calories. He brings up the concept of neuromyelination.
Yes.
Can you translate that for the audience? Why does Riker care so much about the fat content in a middle schooler's milk carton?
It all comes down to brain development. Think of the nervous system and the neurons in a growing boy's brain like a complex network of electrical wires.
Okay.
For those wires to conduct signals efficiently without short-circuiting, they need thick rubber insulation. In the human body, that insulation is called myelin.
And the process of building it is neuromyelination.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what builds myelin? Dietary fat, specifically essential saturated fats and cholesterol.
So Riker's argument is that growing boys absolutely require these heavy animal-derived fats.
They need them to insulate their nerve fibers and to serve as the building blocks for hormonal growth during puberty.
And by depriving them of these specific fats in the school cafeteria, by giving them skim milk loaded with sugar instead of whole milk loaded with fat, he claims the state is actively sabotaging their neurological and endocrine development.
He frames it as an intentional pacification program. He says the state is engineering a generation of low-energy, brain-fogged subjects who will only ever possess the physical and mental capacity to sit passively in corporate cubicles.
He literally calls the removal of whole milk a state-sponsored demilitarization of American youth.
And if the state is successfully conditioning children in the cafeteria with skim milk, the natural next question is, what happens to the grown men who try to bypass this system entirely?
What happens to the men who try to produce and consume their own raw, unadulterated dairy?
That transition takes us straight from the public school cafeteria to the battlefield of the independent farm.
Riker brings up the real-life case study of a man named Amos Miller. This is a genuinely fascinating story that has been making waves in alternative food circles.
Yes, Amos Miller is an Amish farmer based in Pennsylvania. Over the last several years, his farm has been repeatedly raided by armed federal agents from the USDA and the FDA.
The issue at hand is Miller's refusal to comply with federal processing regulations, right?
Right. He sells raw meat and, crucially for Riker's argument, raw, unpasteurized milk directly to private buyers.
Now, the mainstream media and the state framed these raids purely as public safety measures. arguing that unpasteurized milk can carry dangerous pathogens like Listeria or E. coli.
But Riker completely rejects that premise.
He dismisses the public safety argument as a thin veil for tyranny.
He argues that the state fundamentally does not care about the health of the individual. What the state cares about is the total elimination of any economic or biological activity that it cannot monitor, regulate, and tax.
He uses Amos Miller as the ultimate modern symbol of the clash between state bureaucracy and patriarchal independence.
This raises an important question. Who really owns your body?
Right. If you are an adult and you choose to take the biological risk of drinking raw milk from a farmer you trust, does the state have the right to stop you with armed agents?
This is where Riker dives deep into the jurisprudence of the body and coins the term bio-liberty. To build this framework, he cleverly flips the theories of the 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault.
Foucault wrote extensively about biopower.
He did. Foucault argued that the defining feature of the modern state is its need to control populations by regulating their biology, birth rates, public health mandates, sanitation, and diets.
And Riker applies Foucault's biopower directly to the pasteurization of milk.
Exactly. Riker argues that the state uses its biopower to mandate pasteurization across the board. But according to Riker, the true goal isn't to kill pathogens.
It's control.
He claims the state mandates the boiling of milk to destroy the vital life force, the enzymes, and the beneficial bacteria of the milk itself, rendering it biologically inert.
He coins the phrase pasteurized consent. Let me make sure I'm following his logic here.
Go ahead.
He is saying that by normalizing the idea that the government must literally boil your food to make it safe before you are legally allowed to drink it, the government is normalizing the underlying premise that your body actually belongs to the state.
That is precisely his argument. The state is establishing a precedent of biological paternalism.
Wow.
Therefore, according to Riker, the simple act of seeking out raw milk, of driving out to a farm and handing cash to a man like Amos Miller, transcends a simple dietary choice.
It becomes an act of agorism.
Yes.
Let's explain agorism for the listeners who might not be familiar with the term.
Agorism is a libertarian political philosophy that advocates for achieving a free society through counter-economics.
It means intentionally participating in black and gray markets.
Right, to undermine the economic power and legitimacy of the state.
So Riker elevates the act of buying a gallon of unpasteurized bootleg milk to a revolutionary act of civil disobedience.
He calls it asserting your bio-liberty. You are planting a flag and declaring that your internal biology, your gut microbiome, and your hormonal pathways are sovereign territory that the USDA has no jurisdiction over.
And in this underground free market landscape, Riker identifies a very specific hero.
The artisanal cheesemonger.
I have to say, the way he writes about this is incredibly vivid.
He creates a really powerful juxtaposition. On one side, you have the dependent urbanite,
Sipping a heavily subsidized, artificially flavored soy latte.
entirely reliant on global corporate supply chains. And on the other side, you have the independent cheesemonger or the dairy farmer.
Riker portrays the farmer as a titan of the free market.
This is a man who is navigating incredibly complex biological realities. He is managing bacterial cultures, utilizing natural enzymes, overseeing multi-year aging processes in cellars.
And he is doing all of it without asking the state for permission or oversight.
Riker sees this as a return to the historical ethos of the steward. He maps this concept of stewardship perfectly onto the physical architecture and geography of the traditional farm itself.
He treats the farm not just as a piece of property, but as a sovereign polis, a self-contained city-state.
And he divides this farm into 3 distinct domains that map onto the patriarchal psyche.
He breaks it down into the house, the barn, and the pasture. How does he assign psychological traits to these physical spaces?
It's a very classical, almost Platonic division. The house represents the animus, or the mind.
Okay, the mind is the house.
This is the realm of the ledger, where planning, structure, financial governance, and strategy occur. Then you have the barn. The barn represents the body.
The physical work.
This is the domain of physical exertion, heavy labor, the milking of the herd, the birthing of calves. It is pure action and production.
And the third?
Finally, you have the pasture. The pasture represents the soul. This is the untamed element, the connection to the deep rhythms of nature, the weather, the soil, and the divine.
So a complete man has to integrate all 3.
Exactly. Riker argues that a man who lives only in the house, only in his mind, is a parasite, an academic, or a bureaucrat. A man who lives only in the barn is merely a beast of burden.
To be whole, to be a true patriarch, you must integrate the mind, body, and soul.
The farmer stands at the center of these three domains, acting as the philosopher king, imposing rational order on the chaos of nature while extracting its vitality.
And Roker makes it clear that this isn't just some poetic metaphor for living a good life. He argues this dynamic is the literal fuel of historical empires.
He dives deep into historical case studies to prove that civilization fundamentally requires this high-density energy to expand.
Let's look at his first major example. He calls it the Mongol exception.
The Mongol exception is his most devastating counterargument to the modern plant-based narrative. Riker looks at Genghis Khan and the Golden Horde.
The most formidable, rapid, and terrifying cavalry force in human history.
They conquered a landmass stretching from the Pacific Ocean all the way to Eastern Europe.
And Riker points out they didn't do it on a diet of grain,
Not at all. They did it fueled almost exclusively by kumis,
which is fermented, mildly alcoholic mare's milk.
along with cured meat. Riker points out the strategic genius of this. Agricultural armies relied on incredibly vulnerable, slow-moving supply chains of grain carts.
The Mongols didn't need supply carts.
They rode their fuel. The horse provided the tactical mobility, and the horse's milk provided the dense glycogen, the fat, and the testosterone needed for constant warfare.
Riker creates this brilliant contrast between the Mongols and the Byzantine Empire.
He claims that while the Mongols were expanding outward on waves of testosterone and animal protein, the Byzantine Empire was withering into irrelevance behind their walls.
Because they relied on a bureaucratic distribution of bread and vegetables.
He has this line where he says a diet of bread might suit a monk copying manuscripts in a scriptorium, but it cannot sustain an imperial will. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker applies this exact same logic of biological fuel to the Roman Empire and classical Greece.
He constructs another formal logical argument, this one regarding the intersection of architecture, warfare, and nutrition. The syllogism of the master builder.
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand the audacity of his claim here. He is literally suggesting that the physical marble of the Parthenon is the downstream result of dairy consumption.
He is. Let's break down his syllogism. His major premise is that all advanced architectural and martial feats, whether that is the discipline of the Roman legions marching across Europe or the physical labor required to quarry and stack the marble of the Parthenon, require incredible skeletal density, joint stability, and high muscular output from the men performing the work.
That makes intuitive sense. You need incredibly strong men to build big things.
His minor premise is that heavy dairy consumption is the only naturally occurring nutritional pathway capable of providing the massive amounts of bioavailable calcium, and, crucially, vitamin K2 needed to sustain that skeletal density across a whole population.
Vitamin K2. He specifically mentions vitamin K2 and the activator X theory. For our listeners who aren't deep into nutritional biochemistry, what is activator X?
Activator X was a term coined by Dr. Weston A. Price in the 1930s, which modern science later identified as vitamin K2.
And where is it found?
It's found almost exclusively in animal fats, specifically grass-fed butter, cheese, and organ meats.
And what does it do?
Its biological function is to act like a traffic cop for calcium. It takes calcium out of your arteries, which prevents heart disease, and forces it directly into your bones and teeth. Riker notes it is also essential for testosterone synthesis.
So Riker's conclusion to the syllogism is that without the heavy consumption of goat cheese, sheep's milk, and animal fats, the ancient Greeks would literally not have had the skeletal integrity to lift the stones of the Parthenon.
He says it's an act of historical gaslighting by modern academics to suggest that the men who sculpted and modeled for the idealized hypermuscular marble statues of Hercules were eating plant-based Mediterranean diets.
He firmly believes those empires were built on saturated fat.
And he argues that when men collectively own and manage that dairy production, it inherently creates a culture of fierce political independence.
He brings up a fascinating, slightly obscure piece of European history. The medieval Swiss chess guilds.
The cheese guilds, yes. He spends quite a bit of time on this.
What is the insight here? Why does making cheese lead to a militant democracy?
Riker describes these guilds as exclusively male, highly militant fraternities that controlled the high alpine pastures of Switzerland. Managing these pastures required immense physical labor.
Moving herds up steep mountains, defending them from predators.
And hauling massive wheels of dense, calorie-rich cheese back down.
And because they controlled this incredibly valuable, non-perishable caloric surplus, they gained massive economic power.
Exactly. They used the wealth generated from the cheese to fund their own local militias and forge weapons.
Then the Austrian Habsburgs entered the picture.
One of the most powerful royal houses in Europe. When they tried to tax and subjugate them, These dairy farmers use their physical strength and their independent wealth to humiliate the Habsburg armies in battle.
Riker uses this historical event to prove a core axiom. When a fraternity of men controls their own surplus of high-density energy, they cannot be ruled by foreign tyrants or distant bureaucrats.
Which brings us to his analysis of what happens when a population loses that independence.
Riker warns that modern America is repeating the exact mistake that led to the fall of Rome. He points specifically to the Roman annona.
The annona was the grand dole. As the Roman Republic transitioned into an empire, the state began providing free or heavily subsidized grain sheet carbohydrates to the urban citizens of Rome to pacify them.
And Riker draws a direct, unsparing comparison between the Roman grain dole and modern welfare systems like EBT and SNAP programs.
He does. He argues that just as Rome used grain, the modern administrative state uses EBT to flood lower-income populations with cheap, highly processed carbohydrates.
Specifically, high fructose corn syrup, seed oils, and processed grains.
He argues this isn't just poor nutritional policy, it's a deliberate strategy to destroy individual agency.
He says a diet of refined sugar and seed oils creates a manageable, dependent, surplus population that is quite literally too heavy to physically move and too metabolically exhausted to revolt against the government.
It's the ultimate realization of the bread and circuses stupor.
To understand why a population would willfully accept this stupor, why they would trade the vitality of the farm for the lethargy of the feedlot, Riker turns from history to psychology.
He relies heavily on Jonathan Haidt's moral foundations theory to ruthlessly psychoanalyze the modern vegan and leftist mindset.
Haidt's theory is incredibly influential. For our listeners, Haidt maps out different moral axes that human beings use to make ethical decisions, right?
Correct. Haidt identified several foundational moral axes, such as care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, and sanctity versus degradation.
And most traditional conservative societies weigh all of these axes somewhat equally.
But Riker claims that modern leftists and vegans operate almost entirely on just one axis.
Just one.
Yes. Riker argues they view the entire world exclusively through the care-harm lens. He says they operate on a framework of emotional bleeding heart sentimentality.
They weep for the perceived suffering of a dairy cow.
Hyper-focusing entirely on the harm axis, but in doing so, they completely abandon the other crucial foundations of a functioning society.
So by hyper-focusing on the cow, they end up betraying their own tribe.
Exactly. Riker claims they lack loyalty to their own kin's biological health. They lack respect for the authority of thousands of years of ancestral wisdom and animal husbandry.
And they lack an understanding of the sanctity of the biological contract.
Which again is the sacred agreement that we protect the herd from chaos and the herd feeds us with its vitality.
Because they only understand care harm, Riker labels them as moral imbeciles who are perfectly psychologically suited to be compliant, rootless, globalist citizens.
Because of this profound moral and biological imbalance in society, Riker doesn't just diagnose the problem. He advocates for very specific, tactical applications to rebuild male solidarity and resistance.
He introduces a concept he calls the Dunbar dinner.
The Dunbar dinner references Dunbar's number. That's the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships.
Usually around 150, but with a much smaller inner circle.
Right. Riker proposes this as a direct countermeasure to the modern epidemic of male isolation and loneliness.
He says men need to physically gather together and share heavy, raw dairy and high-fat meat to forge deep bonds. He calls this forging synthetic kinship.
His reasoning is rooted in evolutionary biology. He argues that the physical act of consuming difficult, heavy, high-fat foods together bypasses the higher verbal centers of the brain that are prone to deceit and politeness.
It goes straight to the limbic system.
Exactly. It signals deep safety and builds profound, primal trust among a group of men.
He creates a fascinating contrast between this type of historical male bonding and the way people gather today. He looks back to 1727 and praises Benjamin Franklin's Junto Club.
The junta was a mutual improvement society where working-class men gathered to debate morals, politics, and philosophy. Riker highlights it as a space of intense intellectual rigor and masculine dialectic.
And he immediately juxtaposes Franklin's Junto with what he sees as the modern equivalents.
The mimosa-soaked brunch or the gender reveal party.
He dismisses these modern gatherings as effeminate, narcissistic displays of identity politics that lack any real dialectical friction or nutritional substance.
He argues that if you want to build a civilization or even just build a strong local community, you need the friction of debate and the heavy fuel of meat and dairy to sustain it.
This ethos of the patriarch providing heavy fuel extends right into the home, specifically to the head of the family dinner table.
Riker spends an entire chapter exploring the Oedipal and sociological implications of the traditional family roast.
He genuinely laments the decline of the classic meat and potatoes dinner, doesn't he? He says that meal fueled the industrial patriarch of the 20th century.
He views the act of serving dinner as a deeply symbolic ritual. When a father stands at the head of the table, physically carving a large cut of roasted meat and serving dairy-laden side dishes to his family, Riker says he is physically and psychologically integrating two vital roles,
The provider who hunted or purchased the meat,
and the nurturer who is feeding his kin. By presiding over the roast, the father imposes structure and order on the chaos of the natural world for his family's benefit.
and Riker points out the insidious nature of the alternative. He argues that subsisting on highly processed, easily digestible children's food, things like chicken nuggets, sugary cereals, or soft plant-based patties, keeps men psychologically infantilized.
He claims that eating difficult, strong foods like rare steak, bone marrow, and raw aged cheddar is the symbolic daily act of accepting the burden of adulthood.
To eat like a child, according to Riker, is to remain a perpetual subject of the matriarchal nanny state.
So what does this all mean for the listener? How does the red-pilled man navigate his daily life with this paradigm?
Riker brings all of his philosophy, biology, and history together into one final striking metaphor: the modern grocery store.
Matrix in the grocery store.
I want you, the listener, to picture this because Riker describes it so perfectly. You walk through the automatic sliding glass doors of your local megamart.
Immediately, you are assaulted by a sensory hallucination.
The bright lights, the vibrant packaging. Riker says it is all an illusion hiding a landscape of high fructose corn syrup, refined seed oils, and soy lecithin.
He describes the inner aisles of the supermarket as a labyrinth of blue pill soy traps. He argues that 90% of the items on the shelves are specifically engineered by food scientists to keep the population weak, chronically inflamed, lethargic, and hormonally bankrupt.
But, he says, there is a red pill sitting quietly in the refrigerated aisle.
Usually pushed to the bottom shelf.
The gallon of whole raw milk.
Riker calls that jug of milk a biological assertion of reality.
He argues that when you bypass the aisles of processed grains and seed oils, when you reach down and grab that jug of unpasteurized full-fat dairy, you are actively rejecting the simulation of industrial slavery.
It says perhaps the only item in that massive store that hasn't been pasteurized, processed, or genetically engineered to make you compliant.
Ultimately, Riker is forcing us to look at consumption not as a passive consumerist act, but as a deeply political one.
In his framework, every single time you choose raw dairy and high-fat meat over plant-based mimics, you are casting a visceral vote for your own biological sovereignty.
Which brings us to a final, incredibly provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. Conrad Riker forces us to ask a question that changes how you look at every meal. What if the food on your plate isn't just a matter of personal taste or calorie counting?
What if it is the literal metabolic substrate of your political freedom?
If the administrative state controls the nutrients that build your skeletal density and the fats that fuel your hormonal drive, do you really own yourself?
It is a question that challenges the very foundation of how we define modern liberty. Because if our physical capacity for resistance, our energy, and our biological drive are hollowed out by our diet, then all the theoretical political rights written on paper are entirely meaningless.
Exactly. To the manosphere, the MRAs, and the red-pilled listeners out there, if you truly want to unplug from the matrix, if you want to understand the biochemical warfare being waged against masculinity, and if you want to reclaim your biological sovereignty, you need to read this full manifesto.
The historical precedents and biochemical syntheses Riker provides go so much deeper than we could ever fully cover in one deep dive.
The sheer scale of Riker's argument, connecting ancient Indo-European genetics to modern grocery store aisles, is staggering to analyze.
Then take action.
Head over to Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook. Seize this knowledge for yourself.
And don't forget to follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack for his ongoing essays and dispatches from the front lines of this cultural and nutritional war.
Finally, if you got value out of this exploration today, please one last time hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It is the only way we can continue to bring you these deep dives into paradigm shifting sources just like this one. Until next time.